Elias Ward yanked the reins when he saw a body collapse in the red dust. It was a tall Apache woman, her muscular frame covered in dust and dried blood. Purple welts from a whip marked her shoulders and back, and her wrists were still bound with a strip of leather clear, sign she had been tied up. Her breathing was shallow, and her chest rose and fell in faint, uneven motions. Elias leapt from his saddle and dropped to his knees beside her. Heat radiated off the ground in shimmering waves. But colder still was a thought that flashed through his mind. This could be a trap. The Apache tribe had warned him more than once not to meddle in their affairs. He placed his hand on her neck. Her pulse was so faint it felt like it might vanish at any second. If he left her here, the sun would kill her within a few hours. Gritting his teeth, Elias drew the knife from his belt and sliced through the leather binding. Then he hoisted her over his shoulder. She was heavy, like carrying a whole sack of grain, but he powered through and threw her across the horse's back. "Damn it," he muttered, kicking the res. The horse bolted forward, red dust swirling in its wake, the scent of blood, sweat, and hot sand mixed in the air. Elias did not look back. If anyone was watching, they would know whose side he had chosen, and this time there would be no turning back. Elias Ward galloped through the rickety wooden gate, rushing to Kina inside the cabin. He gently lowered her down, laying her on an old blanket spread beside the fireplace, then hurried to start a fire. Flickering yellow light danced across the sun. Darkened, sweat-soaked face he dragged over the wooden bucket and scooped what little water remained in the tank. Every sip of water during the dry season was worth its weight in gold. But Elias soaked the cloth and used it to wipe the dust and dry blood from her face. The pulse at her wrist was still faint, but at least she was alive. Elias had never been one to get tangled in other people's problems. A few years back, disease swept through this land and took his wife and 2 young sons. Since then, he had lived like a ghost, tending only to the parched land and his small herd of cattle. He stayed away from town and even farther away from the trouble that came with other people. But what he had done tonight shattered all of that. The woman before him, Ta, was unlike the Apache women he had seen before. Her body was powerful with bulging arms and broad shoulders like a warrior. The whip marks on her back told of a brutal punishment, likely for betraying tribal law. Elias knew one thing for certain. If the tribe found out he had taken her in, they would brand him an enemy. Outside, night was falling fast. Prairie wind swept sand to the cracks in the cabin walls, carrying with them the lingering heat of the day. Elias threw more wood into the fire and dropped down beside Tina. The flames lit up his face, weathered, sun-shed with gray eyes that were cold but deep. He handed her the last bit of water in a small bowl. She parted her lips slightly, drank slowly, and then slipped into unconsciousness. Elias let out a heavy breath and pulled the rifle close, resting it within arms. Reach. He leaned back against the wooden wall, eyes fixed on the door. He knew exactly what kind of people would leave. The best Wild West stories. A woman to die in the desert, and that they might return to finish what they started. And tonight, if they did, Elias Ward would be the one standing in the doorway. The fire in the hearth had faded, leaving only a bed of glowing embers. Elias dozed in his chair, the rifle resting across his lap. A faint, rustling sound snapped him awake. Takina. She pushed herself upright, her dark eyes wide and wild with panic. In an instant, her large hand snatched a small knife from beside the stove. Steel flashed in the firelight. Elias did not move. He slowly raised both hands, his voice low and growly. "If you are going to stab me, do it clean. But if you want to live, put the knife down." Tina was panting, sweat beading on her forehead. Her eyes darted around the cabin. Small, old, but not a prison. Then to the man in front of her, tall, lean, unshaven, with eyes that were steady and cold. She hesitated. Elias kept his voice calm. "I cut your bonds. If you want to leave, that door is open. But out there is nothing but hot sand and vultures." The knife trembled in her grip. After a long pause, she let out a breath and dropped it to the floor. Her powerful body collapsed like a felled tree. Eli stepped forward, picked up the blade, and handed her the last bowl of water. "Drink. You need it more than I do." Takina took the bowl and drank in slow sips, her eyes never leaving Elias, as if trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. Without another word, Elias stepped out onto the porch and sat on the edge of the steps, his rifle across his lap. Takina tilted her head, watching through the door. In the Wild West Stories podcast, moonlight, the man's silhouette remained still as stone, the only movement, the faint wisps of smoke curling from his cigarette. That entire night, Takina did not sleep. Each time the nightmares came, she opened her eyes and saw Elias, still there, never coming in, but never leaving either. A strange feeling began to stir in her chest, something she thought had died with her past, a sense of safety. By the time the sky began to pale, Elias had not moved. He simply turned his head and spoke quietly. "If you want to stay until you are strong, again, you can. If you want to leave, I will not stop you. The choice is yours." Tina stared at him, then turned her face away. She said nothing, but her hand tightened around the blanket draped over her shoulders, and that was her answer. The sun rose, casting its light down on the weathered roof of the cabin. Takina could stand on her own now. She stepped out into the yard, her shoulders still roughly bandaged, but her gaze sharp and focused. Elias was fixing a broken section of fence, not bothering to look up. "You are stronger," he said in an even tone. "If you want to eat, there is a spot to haul water behind the cattle pen." Tina said nothing, but a moment later, she picked up a wooden bucket and made her way to the water tank. Her thick, muscular arms flexed beneath sunned, darkened skin as she pulled up the bucket. Elias glanced over someone who had nearly died just the night before and was already strong enough to work. It caught him by surprise. That day, Takina said almost nothing, simply followed Elias in silence, watching how he patched the fence and mixed mud to repair the walls. As the afternoon faded and Elias finally paused to rest, she suddenly stepped forward, picked up the hammer, and finished driving in the last posts. Elias stood still for a moment, then gave a quiet nod and let her carry on. That evening, for the first time, Takina lit the kitchen fire without being asked. She cooked a simple rabbit stew and set it down in front of Elias. Without a word, he looked at the bowl, then at her. A silent nod was all the thanks he gave. In the days that followed, the cabin was no longer so quiet. The sound of hammers, shovels, and wood clashing together filled the air. Elias dug a new waterhole. Tina hauled stones to block the wind. Her strength so great, she rebuilt an entire section of the fence in just one afternoon. One evening, as the sunlight faded, the two of them sat on the front porch. Ellis lit a cigarette and Takina Widow lit a small knife. For the first time, she spoke. "Why did you save me?" Elias stared out at the cracked, dry fields. "Because I could not bear to see someone left out there. I have seen too much death." Takina was silent. After a moment, she nodded. A simple answer, but something inside her seemed to uncoil and loosen. That night, as the wind rustled through the old roof, Tina no longer tossed and turned. For the first time in months, she slept deeply, while outside the cabin, Elias's slow, steady footsteps circled the homestead. "Thank you for being here. If this story reminded you of days gone by, dusty sunsets, and the echo of hooves pounding in your heart, go ahead and subscribe to my channel so that each day we can sit together once more and I will tell you another story from the Wild West. That a rancher lived alone for years. Afternoon, the sky suddenly turned a harsh golden hue. Elias was tightening the reins on his old horse when the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. His head snapped up. On the horizon, a faint trail of dust was growing larger. Uninvited guests, Ellis muttered, grabbing the Winchester propped up on the porch. Takina heard the sound and stepped outside. The moment she saw the riders, she froze. 3 Apache warriors, on horseback the entrance to the ranch. Their faces were painted for war, their eyes cold as ice. The one in front nudged his horse forward and spoke in a deep, flat voice. "Our woman is here. Hand her over." T took a step back, her hand instinctively gripping the small knife at her side. IA stepped forward, placing himself between the cabin door and the riders, the rifle steady in his hands. "She is injured. She has the right to stay here until she is healed." Another warrior snarled, his voice rising. "She has been cast out by the tribe. She has no right to live on this land. If you shelter her, you become our enemy." Elias did not lower his gun. His gray eyes were cold steel. "If you want to kill someone, you will have to go through me first." The silence that followed was taut as a drawn bow. The wind kicked up red dust swirling around the horse's hooves. From behind, Elias, Tina stared at him, his face calm, but his shoulders tense, ready to fire at the first wrong move. Finally, the lead warrior lowered his spear, his gaze burning with fury. "We will return. Next time, we will not come alone." They yanked the reins and galloped off, leaving behind a trail of dust and a heavy, suffocating silence in the yard. Tina gripped her knife so tightly her knuckles turned white. Elias turned back toward her, the fire still flickering in his eyes. "They will come back with more," he said quietly. "If you still best Wild West love stories want to stay, we have to prepare." T nodded, her eyes now lit with a different kind of fire. Not fear, but the burning will to survive. That night, Elias lit the lantern and dragged out every round of ammunition and every old sandbag from the shed. Tina stood beside him, sleeves rolled up, helping him barricade the windows and build up defenses in the yard. For the first time since she had come here, she was no longer just a refugee. She had chosen to stand with him for the battle to come. 3 days later, before the sun had fully set, red dust began to rise on the horizon. Elias stood on the porch, his Winchester in hand. Takina had tied her hair back, gripping a spear and a knife, her stance that of a warrior ready for battle. The sound of hooves grew louder until nearly 20 Apache riders swept in, surrounding the ranch in a tight circle. The air was thick with the smell of horse sweat and tan leather. The warriors remained silent, save for the heavy snorts of their horses. An elder stepped forward. He was old, with long, silver hair and a deerskin cloak draped over his shoulders. His face was as stern as stone. He looked at Elias, then at Tina, standing tall behind him. "She was cast out. She belongs to the dust. Why do you keep her?" Elias did not lower his rifle. "Because she is still alive, and she has a right to choose." A murmur rippled through the circle. A young warrior shouted, "She dishonored the tribe. She cannot be allowed to live." Tina stepped forward, her voice thunderous. "I dishonored no one. I was punished for not bearing children, but that is no crime." Silence spread like a wave. The warriors looked at one another, though the fire in their eyes still burned. The elder turned his gaze to Takina. "You choose to live here, under the roof of a white man. That means you sever all ties to the tribe." Tina gripped the shaft of her spear and nodded. "I choose life here." The elder was quiet for a long moment. Then he raised his hand. "We will leave tonight, but at dawn I will return with the council of elders. If you are still here, by then you will no longer be a daughter of the tribe. And you," he turned to Elias, "you will bear the true Wild West stories. Consequences." He turned his horse, and the entire war party followed, their hooves thundering as red dust swirled over the fence line. Once they had vanished from sight, Elias lowered his rifle. Tina still stood tall, her chest rising and falling with every breath. Elias looked at her, his voice low. By morning, everything will change. Are you sure? Tina met his eyes, her gaze burning with fire. I already died once. Out there, I will not die again. Ellis nodded, tightening his grip on the rifle. The night ahead would be long, and when the sun rose, this ranch might become a battlefield. At dawn the next morning, the sky turned a deep burnished bronze. Elias had been awake long before. The rooster crowed. He stood on the porch, rifle fully loaded. Inside, Tina was tightening the bandage on her shoulder, her eyes sharp and cold as steel. A horn sounded in the distance, low and thunderous like a storm. Then the riders appeared, not just a small group this time, but the full council of elders and their escort. At least 50 people surrounded the ranch in a solid circle. A path opened before the gate. The silver-haired elder rode forward. Behind him came 2 older women there, dark hair straw, with gray members of the matriarchal council, those with the power to decide Tina's fate. Tina stepped out, standing tall. The morning light caught the scars on her son, darkened skin marks from whips that had not yet fully healed. She no longer stood behind Elias. She stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. One of the elder women spoke. Takina, daughter of the tribe, today we ask for the last time. Do you choose to return and face judgment, or do you choose the path of permanent exile? Tina took a deep breath. The early wind swept through, tossing her hair into a wild storm. I will not return, she said clearly. I choose life on my own terms, not under an unjust sentence. Murmurs rippled through the circle. Some warriors gripped their spears tighter. Others bowed their heads as if silently, accepting what they had heard. The other elder woman gave a slow nod. From this day forward, your name is struck from the lineage. You are no longer a daughter of the tribe. You will not be buried in ancestral soil, but also from this day on, the tribe will no longer hunt you. The old chief turned his gaze to Elias, his eyes sharp as blades. You sheltered her. That means her fate is now bound to yours. If she sheds blood because of this choice, that blood is also on your hands. Elias did not look away. I understand. A moment passed one. That felt as long as a lifetime. Then the elder raised his hand. One by one, Wild West romance stories. The warriors turned their horses and withdrew from the circle. Only when the sound of hoof beats had faded did Tina finally exhale. Her broad shoulders trembled, but her eyes were lit with fire. Elias looked at her for a long time, then gave a slow nod. You just chose a new life, he said. Tina answered softly, her voice rough but proud. Number I chose myself. That afternoon, the sky turned pitch black. Without warning, after weeks of drought, the first drops of rain fell on the dusty roof of the cabin.